Morning, everyone. It's just 7 o'clock on Friday morning for our weekly Friday morning session here at the Hermitage. And I think people are still just checking in, so it might be good to just gather and sit quietly in your space with us all online together. Just sit quietly for a couple of minutes, and we've just rushed in and sat down in front of the computer just to settle for a minute or two before we begin the morning. Catching a few breaths. So just to begin, say a few words this morning, get the ball rolling, so to speak. We've been having several discussions with various people and also amongst ourselves, Paul, myself, and Agarika Tai, around the theme of isolation, feeling separate and apart from people in the community. And of course, we're experiencing still the whole COVID pandemic situation, which I think a number of us had had some hopes for being quite subdued, if not completely over by now. And now, of course, that things, we've taken a bit of a surge back in the same direction that we've been experiencing for the past year and a half or so. And so that kind of sense of frustration of not being able to be fully engaged and out and about as we used to be, lending towards that sense of isolation. But one of the thoughts I had also is that it's not an uncommon theme even before the time of COVID and the pandemic, this sense of being so much on our own, so much in an individualistic society, that we experience this sense of disconnection, of apartness from the world around us, and even from our local community, and how much that's a trait of particularly the Western world, but in growing ways in other parts of the world too, that tended, at least in the recent past, to be more community oriented, to be more oriented towards the whole of society rather than the individual. So there is a growing sense of that kind of self-absorption or self-isolation in the world, just in the westernization of the world, and the exportation of our values of the supremacy of the individual, and how that I think that probably stems from the materialistic view of society in the West, founded on the kind of the principles of individual initiative, individual attainment, individual success, and a fairly strong focus on me, on self-identification, self-absorption, and this growing sense of distance from the world around us, which is easily exacerbated by the uh, electronic world, the virtual world, where we can, tap into and get all the things that we need, even just by sitting in a room by ourselves, not have to interact, work from home, all these kinds of things, which make a material society run more efficiently, but at what expense, at what cost? So this has been happening before the pandemic, and the pandemic hasn't helped in some ways, but I don't think we can blame it all on the pandemic at this point. Yeah, the sense of disconnect that comes from all of that, I think many of us feel that over time. So to acknowledge that and to kind of look at the roots of that and see if there's ways that we can maybe, I say, return to a different way, or maybe forge a new way that encompasses the realities of modern society as well. But to bring it up as a value, because in Buddhism, in the Buddhist practice, and one of the core teachings of the Buddha is this understanding and experience that all of the phenomena, all of our ways that we relate to the world through our body, through our mind, all the components of that, all of these, the core and unique teaching of the Buddha is that all of this conditioned reality is not self. And so we think, oh, okay, well, if I can just understand and realize not self, then I'll be happy. And I need to get down into my meditation and really contemplate these teachings and develop my samadhi, and understand how I can get rid of myself. And once I get rid of myself, and then I'll be happy. And all of that, as you can see, just from the words that I'm choosing, is just enforcing that whole notion of self to begin with. Something that I am, or that I have, that I need to get rid of so that I can be happy. Well, that all of those are just embedded with this orientation and experience of the self-perception. So there's it, but it's true. I mean, that understanding and that realization of anatta, not self, is key and to our developing a sense of long-lasting well-being and long-lasting happiness. One of the three key insights, of course, dukkha, anatta, anicca, dukkha, and anatta, inconstancy or impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned realm, and the not self aspect, the fact that it isn't a personal experience. I find personally that reflecting on anatta is a very core and useful teaching for me. But even before I get into the more subtle layers of that experience, using a collected mind as a reference point, I think we need to acknowledge that we need to really do a lot of basic reconstruction of how we interact with the world and how we live our daily lives with that understanding in mind, before we can expect to really understand on a very deep level the subtle aspects of how self-view takes hold in our world and causes us so much suffering. And that just begins with our day-to-day life, our day-to-day routines, and how we can essentially act and be more selfless in a very concrete way, not just in the the subtle understandings and realizations at a deep level, but starting to just reflect on it and implement it in our daily lives to help pull us out of this self-absorption that we constantly find ourselves in. We're so tuned to our happiness and ourself and our own little world and our perception and the frustration that we experience in the world around us. We think people are being selfish, and then we get upset and angry, and we don't realize that we're just also really reinforcing that in our own personal daily lives, and how we need to expand our world around us, and not only through keeping precepts and developing a sense of moral virtue in our own integrity in our own lives, but in how we relate to the world, and always coming back to that sense of looking out from our own inner world, and how can I be with other people in a way that's supportive to them, supportive to me, and kind of let go of this sense of isolation. We really have to take our community and the world around us and the people around us quite seriously, and start to reach out and come out of this self-absorption on a regular daily basis, and that is through generosity, through giving. It's causing us to look outside of ourselves and see what other people might need, what other people might like, and to prioritize that, and to support that. And that only comes through actually being in contact with and interacting with other people as best we can, whether it's our small local group of friends, which oftentimes it is more these days because of our lack of ability to kind of really get out in wide circles and big events and things like that. But just taking advantage of the opportunity to be really present with the people that we do come in contact with, to step outside of ourselves, to stop and pause and consider what this other person is experiencing, and to give ourselves over to a greater sense of responsibility to other people, not just to getting our needs met, which we're so used to doing in relationships with other people. There's the lovely, I've often referred to it, the lovely story teaching from the suttas, where there are three monks that are living together in harmony and doing very well. And one of the reflections that one of the monks had when the Buddha asked him, "Well, how is it that you're doing that?" And it comes about through that kind of sense of acts of loving kindness in body, speech, and mind. Always looking out for the other's welfare, making sure that they have enough food, and if they don't, sharing some of our own food with them, with each other, sharing the common values of non-harmfulness, harmlessness, and just the basic reflection of of why don't I do what the others think, what they want to do, rather than what it is that I want to do. I can do that. I can set aside my own personal needs and go with what it is that will help make these other people happy and contented. And if everybody had that same attitude, then everybody's needs would still get met, and we wouldn't be having to protect and defend and acquire all of our own. So just that act of looking out beyond ourselves and giving what we can and bending when we can and compromising and offering to take in the other person's needs rather than ours whenever that's possible. What a way to lead to harmony, and also to a sense of fulfillment in ourselves. because we're giving at the same time that we're receiving. In fact, that giving is forming the foundation for our own well-being, which is what we're all looking for. So really putting ourselves in the position, getting out of our own needs. I even, you see, and I see in myself and I see in other people sometimes, it's like, even when we have the opportunity to be with other people and to share and say some common activity for the common welfare, um, it's so easy to gravitate into, well, I think I'd rather go and do X, and be by myself, because I think this is more important for my well-being than it is to participate or join in with some sort of um, uh, community kind of a thing, that even though it's not exactly what I want to do and it may not be exactly what I think is best for me, it still puts us in contact with the people, and being with people isn't always easy. And as we can experience living here in a monastic community where we have voluntarily entered a living situation with people that we wouldn't necessarily have chosen to live with, and sometimes sometimes it can be quite challenging to just let go of our own personal needs for the sake of the community. And it goes against our individual needs sometimes, but it's the fundamental basis for letting go of this self-absorption, this sense of self, that we find so restrictive and so difficult. And the peace of mind and the joy and the simplicity and the uplift that gives when we can just set aside our own concerns and look around and be part of an organism of community. It takes away that kind of sense of isolation and self-importance and self-involvement on a very visceral way. And even if you don't have any kind of profound insights into the emptiness of all phenomena, the selflessness of all phenomena, as the Buddha talks about, that first level of lessening self-absorption through just being with the community around us and offering ourselves up to society and the world around us rather than being honed in on our rights as an individual. We're so attuned and socialized to the rights of the individual over the society, and how isolating and painful that is. So we don't have to do it. We don't have to do that, but it takes some effort and it takes some relinquishment to get to that point, and some honest restructuring of how we live our lives sometimes. So all that said, that forms the basis for then, the practice of developing a composed mind, settling down, and that reflecting on that, the benefits of that when we do that, and how it feels good, how it feels really good to be in harmony with other people around us and to be in touch with other people around us. Helps to settle the mind in a way that we can see the deeper subtleties of the reflections on not self. And then we can really, through clarity and ease of mind and composure, start to really bring in and explore the teachings of anatta, not self, the three characteristics, and really contemplating, just as in the Anatalakkhana Sutta, right from the beginning, how that sense, that self-perception forms around the idea of continuity of experience and a level of control over the world around us. And right from the beginning of that teaching, the second discourse that the Buddha taught on not self, he starts out at the very first line is, form is not self, the body is not self. If form were self, then form would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to form or the body, let it be like this, let it not be like this. But since form, the body, is not self, it therefore leads to affliction. And one cannot say in regard to the form, the body, let it be like this, let it be not like this. So it's pointing to the fundamental lack of absolute control that we have over the body, and similarly with the mind, even the feelings and thoughts and perceptions, all the emotional states that we experience. These are conditioned from the way we've lived in the past and what we put our attention on, and to some extent are not really something that's under the control of some independent agent that we call me. There's a certain modicum of how we adjust the mental factors of attention and intention to respond to the world that we experience, and the results of past action and the results of past training of our mind, and the underlying states that support it of greed, hatred, delusion. We have a modicum of control of how we receive that and how we respond to that, and then how we use the factors of attention to redirect our proliferation and our self-absorption into contemplations or reflections that lead us away from that and more into an understanding of how we can rest and relinquish and let go of the causes of dukkha, of causes of suffering. But ultimately, in terms of the conditioned realm, we don't have this control that we think we should have. We don't have control ultimately over the fate of this body, how it responds to certain biological issues, and also the inner, the relationships of the mind, and the inner world that we have, being a result of the conditioning. But we can redirect the ways that we respond and create new good karma to bring us into the direction of deeply understanding suffering and the end of suffering. And all of this is more and more subtly seen in this aspect of not self, that these are impersonal forces, that there's a certain intentionality that kind of feels like me directing the show. But that even those factors of intentionality and proper attention are conditioned as well, through how we view the world and what we place priority on. So these subtle aspects of not self we gain through contemplation and reflection, and little bit by little bit we start to experience the peace of not being so self-absorbed, even on those more subtle levels of mind and how we interrelate to our experience. And that kind of understanding results in a profound sense of freedom, a profound sense of joy and release from this self-absorption. When skillful mind states replace unskillful mind states and come along with a sense of impersonality, then that frees us immeasurably. But that level of understanding and realization comes slowly over time, and I don't think can be done without that firm basis of looking at the world around us and offering ourselves to the world, service to the beings around us as a way of getting out of this self-absorption. And I was just reflecting, I can't think of a reflection that has offered me more solace in times of difficulty than how can I be of help to somebody else? Because there's been plenty of times throughout my monastic life that I've felt very frustrated with, quote unquote, my practice and my meditation, and it's not going well, and I feel kind of hopeless about it, and it doesn't seem like I've ever experienced any peace whatsoever. In years past, not recently, but in the early years, thinking, it's just not. I don't know if I can do this, keep doing this, because of that sense of frustration. But then what would get me out of it would be, well, what can I do? Well, I can I can help this community that I'm living in. I can offer service. I can fall back on that. And even if I can't have a moment of inner peace, I can be of some help, of some benefit, just by, being with other people, supporting a good thing, and doing what I can to, to be of service. And I can try and just be mindful while I'm doing that. And if I don't do anything else, that's a life well spent. But getting out of that me framework is key to it, and involving ourselves with community and the world around us is the major tool to accomplish that. So, a few thoughts for this morning, and we can open up to a few questions, comments.
Okay. That actually is the first.
The first one I'll share? Okay. Oops. Okay. What are your views regarding other realms and or dimensions, whether physical or otherwise? Thank you. Well, if you go from what the Buddha teaches in the suttas, it's a fairly clear reference to other realms of existence, both physical and otherwise. And I see no reason not to regard that as true. I do, I can't say that I have experienced, or many of us probably haven't experienced them ourselves, at least in memory in this lifetime. Don't have those kind of powers to see into other realms like some people. Some of the people who have very strong meditative attainments and powers are able to do, and certainly the Buddha talks about them quite directly, but also kind of matter-of-factly, not exalting them particularly in any way, other than to say that they're part of the conditioned realm as well. Some states, some places of rebirth, other realms like the heavenly realms, being very, very pleasant, and refined, and even based on very, very wholesome qualities of mind, rebirth there. And also in the opposite direction, some of the more unfortunate realms of existence based on obstructive mind states and quote unquote bad karma, unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind that result in those kind of destinations. So I regard them, again, I have absolutely no reason not to believe in them, because they're just so integrated into the teachings. They're everywhere, and people who say that they're just all metaphorical, I think, are kind of missing a lot of the the directness of the teachings. When the Buddha refers to, say, the rebirth of someone, of where did they reappear, and he refers oftentimes to these comments of like upon the dissolution of this body, after death, this being was reborn in such and such a realm. It's pretty hard to get more direct than that, and that doesn't sound very metaphorical to me. So, I have no reason to believe that the Buddha would lie to us just to get us to, get scared and start working on ourselves so that we don't get reborn in a bad place. I don't think that, I don't think that was his MO. So I have no reason to not believe it. And it just makes sense to me, that the momentum of the mind is so strong that just because this physical body falls away, that, that somehow all of a sudden everything stops. So it just doesn't make experiential sense to me as I watch my own mind from moment to moment. But just to use it as a reflection of the relentlessness of samsara. I talked about that on Tuesday night, just that kind of vastness of what we've gotten ourselves into as a motivation for reflection, rather than anything to discuss or argue about as does it really happen or does it not really happen, but to bring it in and realize that we can use that reflection in a skillful way, without turning it into a doctrine that we have to believe in. So that's that on that one. Any comments, Nepal, on that?
No, that's fine. I mean, it's yeah, I mean, the Buddha was quite clear, but also that it the whole point of other realms existing is that we create the causes and conditions through our actions and views and mental states, and that is the conditioning factor. So
right,
it comes back to training the mind.
Right, in the right here and now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Whether it's rebirth into the next moment or rebirth into another life, it's all rebirth.
Yeah, it's all the same old stuff, same old mind, sort of cranking it out.
Yes, relentlessly. Okay, would you mind giving a brief explanation of non-self as you would give it to a child? Does it mean we don't have an identity, or is it just that it is constantly changing, so we can't define it? Well, kind of just a little bit of a little snarky comment to begin with. I probably wouldn't try and explain it to a child, because I don't think children have the capacity to really understand that, and children need to be brought up with a sense of a sense of security in identity, just to get off and running in a good way. But to maybe try and, I mean, it's really hard to explain it in a simple way. And I also, just as a note, I prefer to use, for myself anyway, the translation of anatta, not so much as non-self as not self. It has a different flavor to it, a different quality. And so rather than making a doctrine of belief or a metaphysical statement of some sort, we look at that as a reflection to cause us to see things in a different way. So the question, like, does it mean we don't have an identity, or is it just that it is constantly changing so we can't define it? Even the way that the question we often phrase it ourselves assumes the existence of a self just by the words that we choose. So on a conventional level, we have these 5 khandhas, and they work together in a way that gives us a sense of continuity and does have a certain self-perception to it. But the more we investigate these 5 aggregates, we do see that they are constantly changing. And because of that constant nature of transition and changing, then we have to question ourselves as to whether this can really mean that there is something that is unchanging. If we're really clear and careful about how we investigate, then we see that really, there is nothing that is fixed in terms of something that we can form an identity around as unchanging, which is the basis for the self-perception. So if we can kind of start to undo that, then the actual perception of self will start to change and morph. So self, in a sense, quote unquote, self, does exist, but only as a perception. It's not a concrete, metaphysically unchanging thing, like an entity or a soul that goes from, say, one life to another, from one moment to another. But it is a very real perception, and we can start to see how that perception is formed and is also subject to change. We don't always experience a perception of self when we're, reflecting in ways like this. So. There is a certain amount of identity, but it's more of an identity view or an experience or a perception of identity rather than something that is solid and independently solid and concrete. So using not self as a reflection, we ask ourselves, is form self? Just as I was going through, or is it not self? Our feelings and perceptions and mental formations and consciousness, how do we experience them, and can we call that self in terms of an unchanging identity? And we realize that we can't. And then that's where we stop. And we don't go on to say, okay, well, if those are not self, then what is self? We just rest in that experience of examining everything that we can experience with that perception of not self, and then just see what happens. We let the results come to us and let the understanding and realization of what is not self just be the way it is, without having to try and turn it into anything, without having to try and concretize that as well. Paul.
One of the things that comes to mind is that like the Buddha's teachings on not self are not a standalone teaching. They are part and parcel of that insight into anicca and dukkha, and so that those aspects of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, are one and the same insight, and not self is part of it. And particularly because there's the kind of, especially with a child or with ourselves, because to think that we're adults somehow and mature and is all you have to do is watch your mind a little bit and realize just the whining that goes on, or the kind of craving for stupid things. But anyway, the dukkha is so important to, whether you're teaching a child or teaching yourself. What is the result of assumptions of identity, trying to prop up an identity, trying to get rid of an identity, trying to make a doctrine about identity, all of it, just the feeling of dukkha. And so that, and especially with, say, teaching children, or just your own teaching today, on generosity and virtue and creating connection, is really also addressing the element of dukkha, paying attention to what is it that actually brings about a sense of well-being. What is it that has a wholesome root, skillful root, that brings about well-being and ease, and that is, those are, so it's an integrated insight, and to not get too tangled up in trying to define not self. I mean, it's really helpful as you're parsing it out and getting tangled up. But in terms of how we interact with the world, or how we present and how we engage, tuning into that experiential realm.
Yeah. Just as you were talking to, that brought up for me that old phrase from the I think from wartime, the World War, of like that's, or that we've brought into the present time, of like, relax, everything is out of control. And how that sense, letting go of that sense of control, seeing the changeability and instability of everything, is actually something that leads to less dukkha.
We think just opens up some space around it.
It's sort of like, so all three of those things are connected with each other. And when you realize that, then it's life is so much more manageable. You don't have to try and stabilize everything, to try and control everything, and trying to make everything perfect, because it's not.
It just never was, never will be.
Okay, 5 minutes here. Remembering others for their kindness and generosity brings tears. brings tears at times, and mind starts longing for them in life, even if they are not around. How to deal with this? I'm not meaning if they are not around, meaning the other people, I guess. Remembering others for their kindness and remembering. Well, I think just realizing that, you know, the response that you have that brings, you know, the tears of appreciation is what I'm assuming, is because of the kindness and the generosity, not necessarily because of specific people. I mean, those people that brought it, you know, that you think of that expressed those moments of kindness and generosity and helped you out. They are certainly, you know, what brings, you know, brings it into the world. But that those qualities of kindness and generosity are available from inside yourself. You don't have to have, you know, a certain person around who exhibits them and wish that they were still there and long for them to experience those qualities. They're, you know, a potential for anybody, and particularly a potential for ourselves, so that you can remember the others people and bring them up as an image, and remember their kindness and their generosity as a contemplative thing to do, and it brings a great sense of, yeah, as you say, it brings tears to your eyes. But just remember, it's because of the qualities, not because of those particular people, and those qualities can be engendered in oneself and be brought to mind and reflected on in just the same way. And so to globalize it, take it out of the realm of an individual or one person, and realize that these are universal qualities that are available to us all with some attention and practice.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Let's see, we've maybe got time for one more question. So I don't see that there's really any more questions. Just a couple of comments. Just Eleanor's question, double Eleanor's question about help young people work with not self. There is more sadness or indulgence in darkness in youth that leads to unskillful thoughts and behaviors. Yeah, just I mean, it's not so much a question in that, but just a comment that I think it's the same thing, you know, helping the youth, you know, not necessarily through talking about, you know, philosophical possibilities of anatta, but just how to work with young people from an early age to get more of a world perspective and a perspective about how to be in community and with other people, rather than encouraging them in their own self-absorption, you know, which is hard, particularly with young people, because that's kind of the nature is, you know, developing that, you know, or experiencing that sense of self-absorption. But anything we can do to help bring them into more contact to helping other people, to expressing themselves through generosity and through kindness, helps to decrease that darkness that we see so much happening in this world these days, because it's so based in materiality. Okay. Any other thoughts before we along that line, Paula? Or
no more thoughts. I just sort of there's Maury.
Oh, up top, I didn't see that one. Yeah. I guess that disappeared. Moria is asking, did I hear that obsessing on an event, person, place strengthens the self? Well, yeah, it depends on what. Obsessing, meaning kind of like relentless proliferative thought based on some sort of unhealthy underlying tendency, like fear or greed or anger or whatever. It certainly strengthens the perception of self. It is part and parcel, this kind of like abstraction and conceptualization of all of these things, the objectification, if you will, of the world around us, and proliferation, obsession, is just it's another way that the self, the perception of self, kind of hardens and becomes more embedded in the perceptual world. Yeah, it does. That kind of obsession does do that, and that's where it's like I talked about some other point recently, that working with wise attention and what we put our mind to, trying to get out of that realm of proliferation and objectification, obsession, and just move back to simple experience, the body, breathing, not making the world so complicated.
Great.
Okay.
That's
We'll
it for today.
Call it a Friday morning.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
See you all some other time.